Welcome to Ready, Set, Go. Timing is Everything, presented by Marilyn Barger, PI and Executive Director for FLATE, the Florida Advanced Technological Education Center of Excellence. These break time videos are sponsored by the CCTA, the Center's Collaborative for Technical Assistance, an NSF ATE funded grant. CCTA's original purpose was to respond to a request from the Department of Labor, DOL, to the NSF to have ATE centers provide technical assistance services to DOL TACT grantees. And now that TACT grants are over, we are focusing strictly on helping NSF grantees and proposal writers. Our deliverables are to provide technical assistance webinars, workshops, and best practice documents.
Okay, thank you, Christina. I'm going to start with an overview of this break time video. And what we're going to talk about is timelines and some overview of timelines just in general, what they are, what they're used for, and then more specifically for proposal preparation and also for the proposal project itself. All right, so why develop a timeline? So timelines are a really good organizational and management tool for any kind of a project. They're often used in project management, in all kinds of projects. So doing them for grants should just be another typical kind of project. They allow you to track your progress during the project, and you actually need to have a timeline for your proposed project within the proposal itself. So developing one for preparing your proposal is just good. The model, the one that you're going to do for the actual project itself. It helps keep everyone on task and on time, and it provides a good reality check for what is possible. What can you do in the allocated time, the time frame of the grant, and how much time you think it will take to complete certain tasks. Okay, so let's say we're getting started with an ATE grant proposal. As Christina said, that's one of our focuses for CCTA. And thinking of writing the proposal as a project itself, you want to do this right now as you get started for writing your grant proposal. And it may be like one day you wake up and say, oh, I'm going to start writing my grant proposal today, and that's your day one. But before you do that, or as you do that, you really need to have a little background. You need to know the requirements of your particular funding agency, in this case, the National Science Foundation. You're going to have to estimate the time it's going to take for each of the tasks. And you're going to have to figure out who's going to do what, both for the proposal writing project and also for the actual project itself. So you should be thinking about those pieces. You can't get started very well on a timeline if you don't know who's going to do what and when. So just as a quick visual, this is a sample whole project for a grant. You can see they've allocated 4 months as the planning period, the writing the grant period to get feedback, and then it's expanded out for actually running the particular project all the way to the end of funding. So this is one kind of look for a timeline. It doesn't have much details, but it does have the amount of time that's allocated for different portions of the project and the grant writing. And you can see there's review periods and etc. In that big overview. So we recommend that you start your grant proposal writing 6 to 9 months before the actual proposal due date. For many reasons, lots of things get in the way. It takes a while to mature your ideas. It also takes a while to work on your partnerships and get some of those things in place, approvals in place, etc. And also to develop a good storyline for what you want to do. All right, so the best thing, I think, an easy way to get started is to start with a checklist of some kind or another. the National Science Foundation ATE program has provided, funds a project called Mentor Connect, and that works with new grantees or new schools who haven't ever written a proposal for NSF ATE, and they provide their mentees a checklist for their proposal writing tasks. So I realize you can't read this, let's look at it in parts. But they developed this particular checklist going through the different components of the actual proposal that has to be submitted. So the top of the first half of the sheet kind of goes through, there's a cover sheet, there's a data form, a one-page project summary that has some, in italics, some separate pieces to it that have to be particularly included. The next big item is the project description, which is the real storyline, and then some of the components of that particular aspect of the ATE proposal. But more importantly, for the using this checklist as a timeline, you can see that in the far column, a due date has been assigned for each one of these parts of the project to be, of this checklist to be completed. There's also a column for who's going to do that, and then a space for particular comments or ideas that may need to go with that. So there's a lot of different pieces in an ATE proposal. There's plenty of work to do for everyone. So dividing it up and making sure that everything gets done on time so you can have a good cohesive proposal is an important part of grant writing. Oops, let's see. I think it slides out of place. So the second half of that checklist from Mentor Connect goes through the rest of the information about the project itself. There's a data management plan, references, bio sketches, letters from supporters and commitment, current and pending support, and budget information, etc. down that list you see on the left, with the same idea that you would assign those to particular people and assign a date to when you think they should be done, or when a due date for each of those components are. So it's important to understand what each of these entails in the ATE proposal for the National Science Foundation. Some are rather short, some depend on the storyline, some depend on the budget is interactive with the actual objectives and deliverables of the grant itself. So without understanding how much each of these entails as far as physical contributions that you have to put, time and effort you have to put into developing these pieces, you can't develop a good timeline. So it's important to become familiar with what's expected in the project proposal for each one of these particular categories, so you can build a reasonable timeline and understand what's affected by other parts, what has to come in what particular order. It's not linear based on this list. Okay, so let's keep going here. So let's say you can make a different kind of timeline out of that if you wanted to. So here's one that I put together based on that previous idea, that some of the ideas in that are deliverables in that list from Mentor Connect are a budget. Who I think would do that would be, in our college, it would be someone from the grants accounting office. For an October deadline, they might expect to have the full budget drafted by September 1st and turned into them. They typically take 10 days to 2 weeks to review it, some tweaks, and then to finalize it at the end before it gets uploaded for a submission. Getting the letters of commitment, that might be the faculty themselves or the dean. This usually shouldn't be started too far ahead of concrete ideas for what you want to do for the proposal. So this is your project description. It takes longer than you think to get a good letter of commitment from your partners. Sometimes they have to go out to their superiors and get it checked by the um, different agencies within the company. Sometimes they can turn it around quickly. You just don't know. So it could be a process and take a little bit of time for approvals on their end. And you don't want to give them a draft idea until you really know what you're planning to do in your particular project. So, etc. For these others, writing the narrative, the 15-page description might be a grant writer. It might be a faculty or dean. Probably the most amount of time is spent here developing this narrative for it. So I have a nice, gracious May through September or May through August time frame for getting that done. Reviewing all of the parts the last 2 weeks or a month before the grant proposal is due, and then that would be the whole team, I would expect. And then the final submission is usually done by someone with that particular authority at a college. Submitting at any time 2 weeks before the deadline is a good thing to do. Some snafus happen from time to time, and it's pretty sad when your proposal doesn't get submitted because of one of those little hiccups, either in the system or your system or somebody signing off or whatever reason. So it's good to think about an earlier date to finish up. So digging into, I can expand this whole idea of making a timeline into smaller parts. So this one for expanding out what it takes to get those letters, you'll see here I've listed finding those partners, identifying the collaborations you want to do with them, contacting the actual people, providing a draft letter or bullets for the letter, sending it to the collaborator, retrieving the letters. Sometimes that's a challenge. And then reviewing them to make sure that they're what you need and what you want to actually support your proposal idea. So it's not trivial task to get a letters of commitment. So please think about allowing enough time once you've got your proposal ideas set. A more formal, to kind of close up, there are some more formal ways to do timelines. Gantt charts are one of those. There's a lot of good softwares out there that help you with a Gantt chart. These are typical project management strategies and softwares that are used to develop timelines. They do have the capability of showing things that are interdependent on each other. So you can't really get the letters until you get your ideas down as to what your objectives are. If you want to buy equipment, you might not be able to do all of the budgeting before you know how much that's going to cost, and those kinds of things. So it does allow you to do that kind of tracking. It's not necessary to use these for a project where you may have, especially if you have local control within your institution for making, the people who are involved, and you can check on them individually. This is used a lot like in construction, where a lot of moving parts are happening and subcontractors and contractors have to interact, sometimes remotely. But they're good tools, and they're one option for keeping good timelines. All right, so a few just closing remarks. Start early and be realistic with how much time you have to put towards your timeline. Know your limitations and other commitments as you're setting up your scope of work and when you're going to work on your proposal. Identify your core team early so that you can make sure they can work in their assignments into their other daytime jobs. Use your timeline at every team meeting and adjust it when you need to. It's no big deal to adjust it as long as everything's not getting adjusted past the deadline of your proposal. But it's good to implement a revised times just so people realize that these pieces have to be put together. And thank you very much. Here's my contact information, and I hope you enjoyed your break.